All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. So again, I'm Mary Ellen Slater. I'm the CEO of RepCap and the publisher of Managing Editor. And I am super excited about this panel. I was telling folks earlier when I would kind of designed this panel, it basically, I chose a collection of people that I would really just like to go out to lunch with. So, and just like kind of shoot the shit. So you're basically at just content marketing The View. So, except, less cringe, hopefully a little less cringe, a little more diverse in how we think about things. But that's kind of where we're going. And they actually all amazingly enough agreed to do this before I even told them what the topic was, which I feel like is super fun. I'm going to actually go through and just introduce everybody very, very quickly, and then they can kind of introduce them more depth when we come around and answer some of the first question of this thing. So the topic here that I was like, what does it mean to be in demand? If that's the theme of this, like when I started saying that the theme of this whole session, like the event this year was in demand, that word meant, it turned out that word meant different things to different people when I said it. It meant some people thought demand gen, some people thought like demand on them as marketer. I was like, whoa, okay, no, this is interesting. It turns out this word actually contains multitudes, as Henry David Thoreau would say. So I kind of bringing on like a couple of people here. I've got Julie Kuepers, who is the senior content strategist at Clickboarding, is joining us, and who's actually like just down the road from me. This is sad, I don't get to see you. I'm up in Minnesota this week, up at the clean end of the river, and she's just right over there. Bennett Sung is coming in. Actually, you are no longer at Humanly. We need to update the slides. You can tell us that story here in a second, because you are also very in demand right now, my friend. I have another one for you. Clare Morin, who's joining us. She's a content marketing manager at Unum. So she makes interesting content about insurance. Ooh. Do you know how smart she is? You're smart. And then Misty Albrecht's coming in from Baton Rouge, which is normally my home as well. And she's the VP of Corporate Comms at B1 Bank. And then there's me. So what are we going to talk about today? What does it mean to be in demand? I'm going to actually flip to the camera here. Awesome. The first question I'm going to actually throw out here, and I'm going to start with you, Clare, just because of where you sit in my screen. When I say the word in demand, what do you think? What comes to mind, like immediately?
Okay, so the honest answer is immediately I went demand gen, right? Mm-hmm. But then I sat and reflected, and the more interesting answer came, which is the word trust. Trust. So, because I think that like the brands or the people that have the most demand have the most like keynotes full of people, thousands of people sitting there wanting to hear why. It's because they have real trust. Like people trust what they have to say, and they're helping them, and there's that connection there. And I think that's what it's ultimately about, and what we're all trying to do is kind of achieve that at scale, perhaps. But to me, trust.
Okay, all right, Bennett. What does trust mean to you? And you can also, when we get there, you can also tell people what you're doing these days. But what is trust? What did you hear when I said that word?
Trust. I think trust is a
demand.
I can give it and answer the trust question too, but very much like Claire, my immediate thought went to demand gen, and of course I didn't use in demand gen, but demand gen, because I just looked at the word, I kind of ignored the in. But I think when it comes down to it, I started to think outside of like traditional marketing terms, because that's all that runs through my head. Is how to, because I've been working and starting my fractional CMO business. So now I'm working and helping so many different clients with creating demand, capturing demand. At the end of the day, when I look at it, demand, whether it's for your own self or for the company, it's, you're being sought after for something they need from you. So it's kind of this notion of being sought after, which connects to trust, because you have, in order to be sought after, you have to have proven your experience, and obviously that leads to the trust factor that Claire talked about. So that's how I looked at demand.
Yeah. What about you, Misty? When we threw that word at you, what came to mind?
So I went down the odd road of demanding of me, demanding of my time, demanding of all those things. And then, looked at it through the marketing perspective. And for me, demand is the emotional definition of a need. Like you're putting emotion to it. So it ties into that trust, into that create. And to me, that's more the emotion side of it. When you say demand has either a positive or negative connotation. but it's got an emotional
Mhm.
attachment to it. So
Mhm.
you're connecting on an emotional level when you think of demand in marketing. It's fulfilling some type of emotional need of either belonging or fixing a problem or something like that. There's like that emotional connection.
Which I think sometimes we forget that when we talk about demand gen.
Right.
Right? Like I think sometimes we think about the gen part and forget about the demand. Because I think the other interesting thing here is that Misty, we talked about this from a title perspective. Misty actually works in a different role from the rest of us. You do content, but you do it from the perspective of corporate comms.
Correct.
And your audience
Yeah.
is investors who are coming at it. They actually do come at you and go, "Where is my information?" Whereas
Right.
Bennett's job is to be like, "Hi, please look at my information." You get chased like by and you've sat in both sides of this, Missy. I don't want to dismiss it because you've done the other piece of it too, certainly in the past. But like, I wonder how much that colored, like, because right now they are coming at you, and you're like, how do I get them what they need?
Right.
And get it to them in a way that they connect. And it's not just,
Mm-hmm.
Numbers. So when you think investors, you're like, give me the numbers, give me the black and white part of it. But there's more to it, especially when you talk about ESG and things like that create those emotional ties. So there's that piece to it of making that connection beyond the black and white of the demand.
Julie, what did you think when you heard that word?
Everybody had a really prolific answer, and mine is not prolific. I had two immediate thoughts. First, demand gen, because that's a lot of what I do. And the second one was because of the nature of content, whether it's SEO, copyright, whatever, it's content. I've almost always done content in the roles that I've had during my career. And the content needs were always in demand. And kind of what Claire, all of you said, the trust factor, they knew I was the content monkey and the person to go to because I love content. And I have always, for my entire life, I've loved content. And it does really, I think, resonate a level of trust that, that business lines or business partners put in to you and to your abilities. So, and then finally, just the voluminous fear of how big is that demand? Right?
My goodness.
Yeah. Okay. And I happen to know this, and I'm going to ask about it. You probably even had your own little support group, essentially, for like other women that worked in SEO. Like, Julie, didn't you have like a group at some point? Is it still active? Like,
it's not wholly active. It was called the Divine Digital Divas, and kicked it off. A couple of people said, "Hey, would you tell me what you know about SEO and stuff?" And I was like, "I would love to." And so it got. And if anybody knows me, they know that I am pretty spastic when it comes to content. Like I said, I love it, and it just grew and grew, and I think we were up to about 6 people, but the topics would range from standard SEO stuff to content strategy to specific SEO strategies, or depending on what folks needed. So yeah, and plus it was a great way to gripe about COVID.
I feel like this needs to get revived and continue. So I heard about that and I was like, why wasn't I invited? Question. But yeah, so I think it's interesting because we describe this word in a lot of different ways. We think about demand, but one of the things that I hear when y'all describe this is this idea of competing demands. And I know that like right now, Claire and Misty, you both work right now in like high compliance industries, where so as marketers, we're expected to be creative and interesting and tell these stories, but we also have, y'all specifically, also have these compliance teams that you must also be accountable to, who have their own sets of demands. And then Julie, I didn't know this whenever I put you on this panel, you too used to work in banking.
Yeah, I worked at
and
US
then you got
Bank.
better. Like,
and then I saw the light.
She's really excited about it.
And Misty's like, "Oh, hey, Julie, what are you doing over there?" And so we get these competing demands, and I'm actually going to put this on you first, Claire, because I want to know how you manage it. I'm going to go to you, Misty. But Claire,
he's going to me first. Not fair.
Look,
but
y'all make interesting content. Look, you really do. Yeah. Like your podcast is interesting. Yeah. I mean, how do you walk that line? Like how do you know where you can be creative and where you keep compliance happy? Like how do you navigate that?
So I don't
your
think
work?
my answer is going to be standard. So I'm really interested to hear what Misty and Julie have to say. Because I tell you what, it's my 3rd anniversary at Unum. Before that, I was in kind of tech, B2B, content marketing, really. And then before that, journalism. I have never felt more free and experimental and innovative than I currently do at this 175-year-old insurance company that's fast becoming a kind of tech innovator. And I tell you, I've been thinking about why, because you asked this question when you did tell us what we're talking about. And so I was thinking about it for like a day. And I think what it is in our case, because we have such robust compliance teams and legal teams checking everything we do, like there is a bench of absolute experts who are rigorously checking. It gives us absolute freedom to be really experimental, right? Because they're gonna check us, and so in some ways I think it's easier actually than being in a tech startup environment where you kind of had to do a lot yourself, and maybe you had to do that role, right? And you certainly didn't have legal teams. So in some way, and also we've got interesting leadership that is just very innovative and genuinely kind of like, hey, go experiment, go try new things.
Right.
So obviously, I mean, I can relax because I know that every single project is going through that review, and our teams, we will hear.
So you do the commit the sin. You just do it and ask and tell them I'm going to wait for somebody to tell me no.
You know you've got your professionals there to be rigorous. So in some ways, it just lets us be quite free. So.
Yeah, Misty, how do you approach that? Because you're in a much smaller institution and a much younger institution. I mean, it is a fast-growing bank,
right?
And you do have a legal team, but how do you manage it? I feel like I kind of know this a little bit. I don't feel like you're going to jump out the way that Claire's like, they'll catch me.
No, because my personality isn't like that anyway. I'm going to know all the pieces. Like, no. And it's not just banking, because I was in auto industry and all these other things before. So I've always had, I feel like, guardrails with compliance and legal, and now I have investor relations and SEC. So like, it's all the things.
The SEC sets your guardrails. That really sucks the fun out. No.
It really does. So I feel like you have to know what's in the box before you can work outside the box. So, and know what's required versus what's recommended. Because I feel like there's this huge, wonderful gray area of what's recommended.
Yeah.
And as long as you can, you're aware of it, you're pretty good. And for me here, I've learned a big lesson. And, because we are smaller, we have a lot of conversations, as Mary Ellen is very well aware of. If you let people know what you're doing in advance, like, hey, I'm exploring a podcast, or I'm working on this, and hey, what are your concerns up front? Have those discussions so people don't come in and just like have negativity on it. They know where you're going with it and what you want to do, and they're more of a partner to help you achieve that, and just kind of like a, hey, don't forget about this, or I added this part. It's easier that way when you know what you absolutely cannot do. The rest of the world is just open to you.
But I'm going to put that at you, just because you're not necessarily in the regulated piece of it, but you do have to deal with the competing demands, in that now, especially on the startup side, there is not infinite money to do the infinite things that they want to do, and startup founders are insane, like as a group. And so how do you manage?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a ton of competing demand. Because there's a ton of initiatives that are kind of on parallel tracks, right? So when I'm working in the early stage organizations, we have to look at, how we're going to present and position the founders or founders, right? I mean, they have their own track of requirements because they're going out there pitching. Because investors connect at the founder level, on a very personal level, we got to build a strategy for that. Then we have, building the brand for building the company brand itself. That has its own set of multiple swimming lanes that we have to work in. And like you said, there are so many different things that are kind of being thrown at us in terms of, we should try a podcast. We should try, doing more blogs. We should, make all sorts of different things being thrown at us, and we're having to figure out and navigate, what risks we want to take, right? And then you have customer marketing, because another part of the startup world is now, how are we going to retain our customers? How are we going to expand our customers? So marketing is playing a role there, and then supporting product team on how to make these formal announcements of all these new functionalities that they've just spent lots of money on building, right? So, and then for some organizations, I have partner marketing. So I have like five stakeholders that marketing is supporting, and so it becomes a juggling act. At the end of the day, the priority is how do I get more new customers. So when it comes down to it, always the laser focus comes into demand gen. So that just makes life a little easier, but it is a bit challenging at times to figure out how to support and develop each of these and work with each of these stakeholders, because they're all tugging at knocking the marketing door. Thank goodness I don't have a door. I wish there was some place to hide, because now they all have my mobile phone, so they're all texting me all the requests. I said, well, at least that's better. At least that's better than working in Slack. But those are the things on the early stage side that we have all these multiple competing initiatives, and at the end of the day, it's a lot of it is going to be demand gen, but at the same time, it's also for many of these startups, working with the founders. They're obviously, it's a founder brand, which means CEO, whatever you want, you're gonna get. Right? It's like your priorities will always be priority regardless. But that's kind of how I approach it, because, at the end of the day, they're the boss. They're the one who writes my paycheck. Or sends me my money. Venmo it. So.
She doesn't have to start like Venmo's good. They can't take it back. Julie, what about you? I mean, because again, you've been doing this you worked in those high compliance industries, and now you're in software, you're in tech, similar to what y'all have actually all kind of spun around and worked in different areas of this here. But how do you do it? How do you balance whenever these things are all, like these forces are kind of coming at you? Like, how do you balance it?
It used to drive me crazy, and it kind of still does. But at the end of the day, you have to align to the business goals, and you have to, if you don't know, you have to reach out to your manager or a leader who can say, yeah, you've got 10 things that all need to get done by the end of the week based on what our organizational goals are. Which one do I hop on first, and what is a prioritization of the rest of the tasks or projects? Is that kind of where you were going with that?
You get to go with it wherever you want. You're like, I drink a lot of wine is what I do. I actually just drink a lot of wine.
Yeah, that's a good one.
There's so many things. It's like I block people. That's what I do. I block them. Valid answer.
I throw things at them. No, it's when in doubt, ask. And if you're in lockstep with your manager, then you'll know, okay, this is lower priority, or this is really a high focus task or a high focus initiative for the company. It needs to get bumped up. So if you don't know, there's always somebody who does. So ask.
That also kind of brings me to another thing I was thinking about with this. Like when people feel these pressures, I think sometimes there becomes this temptation to take shortcuts. And that is one of the things that happens. And like they can get you in very big trouble. And I'm just going to go and throw this out as from a startup perspective. If you are in a regulated industry, there are things that should not be the thing that you drop. And there's been some pretty notable examples of that in HR tech. So I don't know if y'all remember Zenefits, which was taken off like a rocket. And then they got busted for essentially using bots because, they needed their insurance. They were selling benefits and they had to get regulatory licenses in California. And they actually had a shortage of those people to do that work. And so they hired people and they trained them, except what they were actually doing was using bots to sit through the sessions so that they could get the license, which seems to definitely defeat the point of getting the license. But you can, on one hand, we could say, man, what jerks, and they certainly got fined. I mean, I think it really took that company was kind of taken off like a rocket, and then they kind of, but that tells me some things about the culture Like they had those pressures, and rather than saying, hey, we can't really fast because we can't meet this demand,
Right.
they chose to take that shortcut.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe y'all seen that happen in other cases, but like that's one that always stood out to me. It's like if you ask these expectations, I could say something bad about the individual person. We could say that individual made a bad decision.
Sure.
But y'all, lots of them did it. It was not one person. One person doing that, it's on them. When dozens of people do that, that means you built a system.
Yeah.
That, I don't know, Ben, if you have anything to say about
No,
that.
I mean, you know what's very interesting. There's obviously with a lot of startups, there's a lot of pressure for obviously acquiring new customers, right? And so, interesting enough, I'm not sure where they get their advice from, but they all feel they all feel they can just send out a bunch of spam emails. They literally will pull Zoom info emails, load them up into HubSpot, lie to HubSpot that you actually validated that they.
So we violated terms and conditions twice now.
Yeah, exactly. So right, but these are the things that startups are pressured. They said, "Well, I got a bunch of emails now, and now I'm just going to go send out a bunch of email content and such." So for me, the minute I hear that, I stop it. I said, this is not I am not standing behind this shortcut that you want to take. I said, there's an ethics to marketing, and especially in demand gen, that we all need to, this code and conduct that we are going to comply with the canned spam, opt-in, opt-out laws in any country. But for me, I literally stop that every time I see it and it's very common in early stage startups who feel like they can do anything. And you know what they'll do? They'll still think, because they're fearful of damaging their reputation, they'll buy a dozen new domains, load those up into a different marketing automation tool.
That should tell you, you're doing something bad if you have to hide it like that. But that's also something that like Claire and Misty would never have to worry about doing, because there's no effing way.
There's no way that's going to get This is what I'm observing. I said, really? You're going to go load up 10,000 Zoom info names and send it from a different domain that doesn't even correlate to the domain that represents your product and your company. It's like, blows my mind. This is what happens, but this is the pressures put on by VCs to say, I want to look at your health of your pipeline, and I want to. So they think that this is an ethical way of doing marketing. I said, no, I will not be part of this whatsoever. If you want to continue this, well, you're not going to have me on board. I'm gone. Bye. But it is something I will not allow any of the folks that I work with to implement that kind of system. That is not going to ever happen under my leadership. So
I'm worried we're going to see more of that as the economy is getting a little tighter. I mean, I'm actually still not totally convinced. Like we keep talking about this recession, like it's already happened. We've had a bunch of tech layoffs. That is true. It's actually not knocked on into the rest of the economy as much as people who spend all their time on LinkedIn might believe.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the job market, you talk about a type of demand, the demand for labor, it's like unemployment is still insanely low. It's still insanely low. There's a certain type of role at a certain type of company that they are losing, we are generally letting people off. But I'm worried that as we see those pressures, like I think there's more of that. I will notice that my own inbox contains more spam lately of people who keep sending me. Although I think this is like a failure of empathy, because I know I got on this list because we reached a certain size, but they all say like, do you need more leads? And I'm like, actually not. Actually, no. I do not. That is actually not the problem that I have right now. It's like, but do you have any good content marketing managers? Because like, I could really use like 4
some of those, right?
I think no one's ever offering me the thing that is my actual problem in these spam emails.
Right.
But I think it comes down to that idea of trust too. Trust. And where does trust come from? It comes from being authentic and good and treating people well. And I really, truly, and this is why I love content marketing, because it's so, I know there's all sorts of magic with SEO that I need to learn a lot more about. But I also know that there's this genuine knowledge of humanity and of serving human audiences, right? And of treating them well. Like, if that's your core intention, to benefit our audience, benefit others like this, and use that kind of as a guiding principle. I think I'm lucky to have landed in a massive, it's actually one of Ethisphere Institute's most ethical companies, 50 most ethical companies. It's been amazing to be at
But
Unum
that's a
and
list.
observe.
Like,
And that's
Okay, making
I
a
want
note.
to be on that list.
all right, but it's really refreshing actually to observe this massive corporate entity that is really living that ethical leadership, and it trickles down. So I would just say anybody listening, like recently we do a podcast called HR Trends. We had Limra on, and that's the massive life insurance or big insurance non-lobbying, like amazing research institution. Their recent study of employee attitudes, the top driver that is pushing employees out looking for new jobs at 6.8 more likely to leave my company. One behavior, my employer is not committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion. That is the core driver according to this massive study, right? And then one of the core reasons to stay in my company, my employer cares about me. Like that's this tide. So that's showing like people, yes, there's a lot of like kind of nasty stuff out there, but people want good stuff.
I think that extends into buyers too. I think, I think that actually extends over. I know that I certainly prioritize that in who I choose to do business with. And the number, I mean, I will leave like business relationships, whether it's my client or I'm their client. Like I will leave if they are not honoring those things. I try not to choose them to begin with. I'm pretty careful about that. But I would also say, having the people that, if you're working with people that care about you, that is also a thing that makes me continue to give people my money.
Right.
I mean, we worry so much about demand gen. This is an interesting piece. We spend so much time thinking about getting the new stuff, and it's like we forget to like maintain the existing relationship. And
building deeper relationships.
Yeah.
So, Julie, what do you think about that? Like, I mean, I guess any other thoughts around the competing piece of it, or even just like that ethical piece that I threw?
Well, I mean, working for the bank as long as I did, there's no other way to be than ethical, because I dealt with legal compliance and more than just the content. I also, you know, it went far beyond that. So I was happy to be aligned with that level of trust. But there have been instances where I am not happy with the black hat strategies that some folks use. And I make it very well known that I don't play in that realm. You know, and it might sound a little altruistic, but that's how I roll. And I tend to kind of turn the volume down on any kind of, you know, if people want to try to make an argument of, oh, it's just this, or no, it's not right. It's just not the right thing to do, you know? And so that's, I guess, when I have been able to do it, I do turn it off or ignore it, because almost like there's almost nothing, you're kind of stuck, right? And so if you can't do anything about it, either, you know, leave or make it well known how you feel. So maybe that task isn't given to you, or that project isn't, you know, in your Monday.com. I don't know.
I was just doing my job, you know, like just a little task. So, but I'm actually going to bring this back to you, because I know that because you do work specifically with early stage startups, and I think sometimes the only thing worse than like your marketing campaign not taking off, especially if you're small, is if it really takes off. Like, and then you're just sort of swamped. I mean, Julie, you probably kind of see some of this too, or Misty, you probably even run campaigns. Like, what happens when it's too much? And I'm just going to start with you on that, Bennett. Has that ever happened to you? Like, I mean, tell me about like some of what have you done whenever you've had campaigns just go woo, like way better than you thought?
I mean, obviously that's the North Star that everybody wants. We want too much. I mean, too much.
They say that. You say that, but
I mean, the CEOs say it. I want too much. I mean, they don't want to be the company at a trade show tucked away in the back right-hand corner that nobody knows about and nobody comes to see, right? They want to. So I think depending upon the business, by the kind of the business goals that were, for example, my time at Alio was a great example where it took almost a year and a half to get to that point of being too much in demand. And it was great because obviously an unknown brand, had risen up to the point where, in 2018 at HR Tech or 2019's HR Tech conference, we opted and we positioned ourselves between SAP and Workday, front and center, front row at the event, and the demand immediately created a swarm of demand. That was awesome. But, of course, the question then becomes, are we organizationally ready for having too much demand? And that's what was the outcome, was that we achieved the marketing goal, too much demand. Everybody wanted to see us. I mean, when I went to the influencer, went to do briefings with analysts, we were the number one brand that every analyst wanted to talk to. I mean, to the point where I think I made 10 trips in 2 days, football field lengths between the exhibit hall and the analyst room. And I talked to 30 plus analysts in 2 days. So, I mean, but the reality of the fact, while we achieved this too much demand, the rest of the organization was not even close to being set up for success at all. They failed, could sales execute? If sales, and then, customer success forecasted their workforce planning based upon sales. And if so, but what ended up happening is that there were leaks inside the funnel and things from an execution perspective. So while marketing created this too much demand, the rest of the organization was not following suit and being able to execute. And that's why it ended up being they overhired, because they could not project. If they didn't have any confidence in their projections for staffing, which is another common pitfall happening in a lot of startups, and a lot of why we're seeing a lot of these layoffs, because they overhired and didn't project and didn't predict a lot of things that were going to come down the pipeline. So from a startup story perspective, it was a 2-year campaign of getting this company Alio to the point where they were seeing that momentum, that snowball of momentum, continue to grow at a very fast rate. That it influenced how investors were looking at them. They got a ton of funding. They ended up being one of the most highly funded AI for recruiting tech platforms at that stage. Obviously, there's been bigger ones since then, but that was an attribution towards investing in the brand and not necessarily investing in a single campaign. This was a create demand program that was built around investing in the actual brand itself and not just demand. So that's an interesting narrative that I actually see patterned multiple times in early stage companies. They want that big splash, but then I always go back to say, is the rest of the organization ready for it? Because that is, if it's not, all of this effort, all of this energy that went into the top of the funnel marketing and creating this excitement and momentum will fall flat. And it's going to be very hard to catch up. And in fact, in many situations, it led to some sort of exit strategy.
Wow. Has there been anybody else? Like, have y'all ever had that happen with a campaign you were running? You're like, no, thank God. I mean, I can tell you, there's somebody, Misty, you might even know who this is. Like, there was a situation where a local person in Baton Rouge, it was an LSU professor who had developed this type of shampoo, like that was really good for curly hair. Ooh. And he was making a very small batch. And then the local news did a feature on it, because he came up, this is his dad, and he came up with it for his kid's hair. Like, his daughter had super curly hair. And so he was a chemist, like chemical engineering. Like, so he basically turned that to, like, how can I make curly hair look awesome in the South, And it was all fine and good. He was just making very small batches. And then the local news wrote about him. And that was cute. That was just enough for him to distribute and like whatever. And then it got picked up by the TV networks.
Ooh.
And suddenly every country, every part of the country, like, and there's this demand, because you can imagine that you don't talk about a painkiller, and with B2B software, we talk about wanting to find that painkiller, how do you get a customer? You know what a painkiller is? It's shampoo and conditioner that actually works on curly hair in the deep south. Like, you tell me my hair will stop frizzing? Like, I mean, that man at that point was like, oh, does it work? And so there was no way. He very quickly, as fast as he could, his website crashed. Because I mean, he had the kind of website that you think you would have. Like, it was like a, got to use like one of the cheap hosting things, like a Blue Ocean. I mean, it was like nothing.
Okay.
And I knew him like as a, like sort of in some connections. We jumped over and at least fixed his hosting. You know, it wasn't, this isn't even normally my like buyer, but I was like, oh, this poor man. Yes, let's get you a real web hosting company. You know, welcome to WordPress engine. Yep. Just, and he had an, I mean, he had a very simple, you know, e-commerce like plugin. Like, oh man, it was wild. And then the orders start coming in. You start building this infrastructure to capture that as fast. He was not remotely prepared. And as he started trying to do it and kind of scaling up and figuring out how he can move this product around, there were a lot of people that got really mad because he couldn't ship. Like, I mean, the backlog, the nasty emails, like he wound up having to have somebody, it's like, yeah, you placed an order and we told you were going to have to wait. He had a little cute little e-commerce site. Like, I mean, he was just completely swamped.
Yeah.
He was not prepared and he couldn't meet it fast enough. And like in the end, I mean, people were leaving nasty reviews on like the BBB. He couldn't even hire people. Like he was trying to grab people to help. And like, I mean, it was one of those things where it's so much better to grow just a little, like in this predictable way. In an ideal scenario, you like match demand with supply and demand with supply. And supply. Oh, it was bad. I mean, just, it could have been somebody's job just to answer the emails from people who are in the world of Amazon, think that all products order, it got shipped to me. And he was like, guys, I'm making this. Like he was literally in a lab coat over at it's Louisiana Technology Center, Misty, if you can picture this, like just going as fast as he can with like LSU students, like fill in bottles, like, and people were messaging him like he was Procter and Gamble. Like, he was just a dad who made some shampoo for his kid. Crazy.
Poor guy.
It was crazy.
I mean, those are always great stories, but that's kind of my lesson to every early stage startup that I'm onboarding. It's like, let's make sure that the foundations are set to scale. That is how I don't want to ever see you get into a position where the entire organization is not ready for the big blitz, you know, and such. And so we need to make sure that every little aspect and touch point inside the customer journey is understood and everybody knows their roles and knows how to get things done. But it's also making from a foundational marketing perspective, making sure everything from your website, how your website converts, how you engage in post conversion, contacting and messaging, all sorts of things. But that's the first thing. The first 3 months I do is I literally sit down and fix all of the cracks in the marketing.
And I think
when you see what happens to your AWS bill if you really take off.
But I think too, I'm in like a pretty massive marketing org. There's like 90 people or something in Baton Rouge and we're South Carolina and Portland, Maine. And
that's true. Claire knows like all the old, just Misty, just for context.
Yeah, I need to visit
in Star Lodge. Yeah, I mean, Star Map.
Yeah. And what I've been observing too, there's a certain agility that's very clever with the marketing leadership, where the second they're noticing that there's this immediate sort of reshifting or, you know, and interesting repurposing of roles, because I think so much is changing quite quickly. And honestly, every now and then I have to catch myself because I come from a publishing background, which is pretty like standard processes, right? Like those newsroom background. Yeah. You rely on really pretty fixed processes. Right. But in this new world, right, with all this change, and I'm realizing, there's a certain agility that's needed. But then, and I know you're going there soon, Marilyn, of how do we stay sane?
Right. You can start there. You can talk about how you do it. Like talk about how you keep yourself like loose in that.
Well, because I was thinking of that in terms of Bennett, where you were explaining it's almost like the sufferings of success, right? Because we always think like, if only, really, you know, it all goes really, that's all I need to happen, right?
Right.
But then you find yourself in a situation where, oh my gosh, it's actually gone way bigger and like more successful. But then you realize, oh, now like a lot of people now want this, right? And all these demands are coming in, and you're realizing, oh my gosh, it's almost more stressful than it was. Things aren't right. It's interesting. It's like, ooh, yeah. So yeah, but me personally, yeah, definitely meditation. I go on and on about it as your amazing writer sat down with me, and all I spoke about, really.
Tell us about it. What is meditation? I actually like to hear about meditation. Like, how do you approach it? Because I'll tell you, I don't meditate. But
yeah, it's not a personal sort of stress relieving thing. And I started in Hong Kong, where I grew up in early 2000s, in a newspaper environment where it was so like deadline, right? And really like, and I really didn't have a method to deal with that, except at the time I think chain smoking and
that sounds like a method. That sounds like a method.
It wasn't sustainable. So anyway, fortunately, I then found this meditation center and learned. And actually, it was Leslie Grover's amazing panel before this, which I watched. Unbelievably amazing. She said this line: "A story is a way of being in the world, and it's a way of existing. We tell ourselves stories all the time." And for me, like the meditation practice is actually checking what are the stories I'm telling myself, right? To sort of intercept, because you learn these basic breathing meditations to start to kind of watch what my mind is up to. But it's really helpful when we're in that fast changing environment where we have to adapt. But maybe I'm holding on to this story of like how it should be versus actually what it is, right? And yeah, so it really helps me. I'm not by any means, definitely a few moments during the pandemic, I was like, really 20 years of meditation? I'm stressed, but it's really helpful to have that inner sort of protection, knowing that things are just so very volatile. I find it helpful.
Bennett, what do you do? How do you manage all of these demands?
Take a lot of naps.
Like chain smoking
must be nice.
I schedule a series of 30-minute naps during the day. I'm very fortunate because I can sleep anywhere, right? Like I can sleep in a plane, 5 minutes on a plane seat, I'm gone.
Whatever.
So, but I do plan scheduled naps. But I just draw myself into the fictional world of General Hospital. Like this is my General Hospital storytelling. It's like, because like I really want to be part of Sunny's mob, and I guess all that's like. But those are the things like this when because I need something to distract me from the day-to-day stuff. And then I'm kind of going to start to experiment with some of these new technologies that are going to help with truly unplugging myself throughout the day from all the noise factors, right? And so, I mean, there are tools that are now coming out that are going to help take away some of that noise. But my question for that is it going to change my behavior? Because I could turn on and off noise easily. I can uninstall Slack every day. Right. But is that going to change my behavior? And that's kind of where I'm still kind of trying to figure out that's the sanity. That's the thing I'm trying to improve upon is how do I really change behaviors to make my day much more relaxing, being able to still be agile to handle some of the pivots that clients want to go through and such. But I tell you, I'm just sticking to General Hospital and a bunch of naps during the day.
Misty, what about you?
I think that, and know all the women can relate to this, but there's this pressure on us to have it all, to be it all, to do it all. And for me, that all kind of came to a head when we first went out, when COVID first happened, and we're all in lockdown. And for the bank, we had this outside force saying, well, now here comes PPP, and there's this huge demand. And
I forgot about PPP. I'm sorry.
Y'all were talking about that. And I'm like, I don't even want to relive that. And I wasn't even a banker. I mean, like, talk about something that was not prepared, and that's the government for rolling out a product to help people. Like that's just never going to happen. But banks were in the middle of that, and we were that conduit to help with that. So then, like we've got banking centers shut down, and we've got clients and non-clients wanting loans. We had system issues at the time. Now I'm working from home with my husband, who also works at home, with 3 small children with sensory overload. And I just raised up my hand and said, I'm going back to the office. I can't work like this. Like, I can't.
Wow.
You have to be able to say, I can't function, like to let go of that notion of I have to be all the things. I have to do all the things. I have to, because you can do it all. You just can't do it all at one time. And you have to be able to put those boundaries in place and talk about those times. And so there were 2 people on the floor, and I'm like, I'm going to be the second person. Like, I'm coming in. Like, I can't do this. And put those, for me, it's really easy. I've learned how to departmentalize. Like, this is my work life, and this is where my home life is. And what are those goals that I have for each? And because at the end of the day, fortunately, no lives depend on us, and we're not curing cancer. Right. So it's knowing what balls can drop and bounce back up, and what can't. So like, I
got to tell you, Misty's no joke about this too. Like, of all the people, and she has some of the best boundaries that I have ever seen in a corporate job. Yeah. Like, and I think that going into the office helps a lot.
It really does.
It's really because I also think that what you just described, you want to go back to that narrative thing that we were talking about with Leslie earlier, where it's like we have this assumption that that working parents want to work at home, that's what we want, and the flexibility. And there are actually lots of working parents who absolutely don't want that, and also people who are not parents, that is not what they want. But we sure tell ourselves a story. I mean, I think if you did that survey, I mean, I actually bought y'all. I worked remote almost my whole career, like as a journalist, you're in and out. And then RepCap was founded as a remote agency. This year I bought a building. So I could go somewhere. I bought a whole ass office building that I renovated.
I'm coming there.
Because I was tired of that I needed the separation. It was bad for my work. It was bad for it's bad for my relationships with my kids, and it's bad for the audio quality of the presentations I give to have chickens in them. I mean, there's like a whole list of things, but mostly it was bad for me because I felt all day from the time I woke. I mean, it's still true because this building, it's coming online right now. I'm just waiting for the planning commission. I gotta get some windows. It's really close, but I wake up in the morning until the time I go to bed. I feel like I'm acutely failing.
You're overstimulated.
Any of those things, like that I'm not being a good mother, I'm not being a good wife, I'm not being a good marketer. I'm not being. My brain is full of bees. Right? and I would have never thought if you asked me 10 years ago, yeah, girl, you go buy an office. I want a whole office, and I did because I need that separation.
Right.
So, I don't know. Julie, what do you do?
I just go into a small room and cry a lot.
That's what I did before. Because I went to the bathroom and cried at home.
Crying is a valid form of stress relief.
No, I am fortunate to work with some really amazing people, and it gets stressful. It's like any job, but we're able to laugh. And Misty, you took the words right out of my mouth. My boss says this all the time, or she says it all the time. We're not curing cancer, because I'll get worked up, right? I'll get all whipped up about something. And you just have to take a step back and realize, you know what?
You can wait.
This is not rocket science, and it's not, like you said, Misty, a cure for cancer. Put it into context, put it into perspective, and go have some coffee or wine, whatever.
I like to tell people that there's no such thing as a content emergency, and I say that with the slight caveat that Misty, in theory, you could have a content emergency. Misty's like the only person here that I think might have a content emergency, and it would involve the NASDAQ or the SEC or the FDIC.
Thanks.
That's about as close as we're going to get. But for the most part, there are no content emergencies. There are no blog post emergencies. There are no
Nope.
Yeah, there's no LinkedIn post of, oh, there could be, but like, man, y'all are really, just delete it. Like, don't y'all know how Labo law works? You just retract it, go away. Like, retract. So, all right, well, I think this brings us actually to the end of the chat. Does anybody have any questions for our guests today as we wrap up?
Come on, audience, send us something.
I know. Lisa did comment. She said that she had the too many leads problem once and that it was wild. I mean, it really will, like, it will break you, like, faster than you think. Like, people, I think, you think that's what you want. I mean, I think even for us as RepCap, like, I mean, we doubled in size this year. And if I look at it right now and I would tell you this was absolutely what I wanted, I was completely naive and foolish about what the experience would be to get here. The things that you have to get out of your head and translate to other people. And, you know, it's like somebody asked me the other day, it's like, well, you're going to grow some, you know, what's your goal? And I was like, well, you know, honestly, based on just demand, if I look at market demand, so we doubled this year and I could double again next year if I could stomach it.
Right.
Like, you know, it's not really about, like, I mean, like Lisa asked, what do you do when you are too in demand? I mean, I guess one thing you have to work on saying no, which I freely admit is really, really hard. You know, oh, this is an interesting, Tatiana's got us a good question here. She said, would any of you please share any tips for safely experimenting and deciding what risks you can take with content creation in a startup? And I feel like, Bennett, you can definitely answer that. And I bet, Julie, you have some thoughts there too. So, who wants to go first? Julie, I'm going to pick you.
Yeah.
How do we experiment, Julie?
Well, I guess you have to really understand your brand and kind of know what the parameters are. You know, at clipboarding, we're HR tech, but that doesn't mean we can't be a little kitschy. But I'm not going to be kitsch on any page that has to do, you know, with something very serious. I think you need to know the situation.
Yeah.
And if you have a strong marketing department or a strong content strategy department, just the alignment between everybody, you know, and if you don't know, if you think, is this going to be the right tone? Is this the wrong pitch? Or, you know, ask somebody else who's been there longer.
Well, what if there's nobody? No, but Julie, what if there's nobody? Like, let me ask, I might throw that to Bennett. So that's good if you've got some people, but if you are the marketing department of one and those guardrails, those brand guidelines, because Lisa said something earlier, it's like the idea that you can be free because you have these guidelines. And I do think that's true. That's actually true of like with parenting, like with kids. It's true of like people, there's a whole lot of places where that idea kind of shows up. That's why brand guidelines, people think that brand guidelines are constricting. Brand guidelines are amazing. Because if you tell me what I can and can't do, and then like, all right, I can go really fast because you've made these decisions and I'm off to the races. I don't have to think about that.
Yeah.
So Bennett, what would you say there? Like, how can Tatiana, like, let's just assume you're probably a solo person in your marketing, you know, here. How do you decide like what to do? Like how?
I think a lot of it is you tap into your past experiences. I think for me, a lot of the experimentation is not so much playing, am I going to do a serious piece or I'm going to do a more kind of edgy piece from a content kind of perspective. I usually experiment on channels, right? For me, it's about, I want to know what channels are, because that's a little, for me, it's a little less risky, except for the monetary investment sometimes. But the reality is I want to play with channels first and then the content form itself later on. But so usually I'm tapping into the reality, like, especially since I've been in the same space for quite a while, I have this confidence that I want to make these two comparative decisions on, you know, do I make a more investment in select software review versus, you know, Google AdWords, or if I was doing kind of capture demand type of work or project. And so but for me, I know both of them. I have experience. I already have a hunch of what that hypothesis answer is going to turn into. But I always am very cautious because I know I've seen this experiment be different in different companies, even in the same space of recruiting tech. I can run recruiting tech all day long and realize that, you know, a campaign on this channel should deliver this, but I'm actually shocked that it delivered delivered an answer in the version B of it. So those are the things that I experiment with a lot on the channels. I don't really try. I try to stick to the brand when it comes to the actual content piece itself. And then I feel like it's easier to measure experiments that are tangible. It's very hard to measure sometimes content. For me, it's a little harder to measure the actual content and the variations of content in comparison to like.
I can do that. I do that part. That's my job.
But the channels are really important. Like which ones are going to get more engagement? Like, because Facebook versus LinkedIn. Where do I start making my investments in social marketing and all of these? There are all sorts of different factors, but I try to keep the experiments pretty straightforward. I like
that they're simple. Actually, what I really hear you saying is that you make low risk tests. These are pilots. That is actually the way you do it. Like, so instead of saying this is our new campaign and putting everything behind it, it's like, well, just run a little thing and see what happens if you spend $1,000 before you go spend $100,000.
Exactly. That's
I agree with that. Yeah. Write a blog post before you make a white paper. Make a social post, right? Make a social post before you go write. Before you make a video, right? Let me see your web copy, your homepage web copy, before we make a 2-minute animated, custom illustrated video.
Yeah.
And also, one thing a colleague of mine has been introducing lately that I adore is reframing failure to learnings. So she'll come out and be like, okay, what would our key learnings there? And before, honestly, I was a bit like, well, these are the 5 ways we failed, and it would just be but now she's making me go, oh, okay, our 5 key learnings are well, suddenly it's very freeing, because now you're expecting not everything to go well, because of course it won't all go well. But then you're saying it's a learning. And to your point, you're testing, okay, try this, try that. Yeah. Another thing, I don't know in the startup it works as well. It does in a massive place like Unum, relying on your internal experts, because they know your audience so well. Right? Your top salespeople, they will know if it's. Do you know what I mean? So relying on them a bit and interviewing them and
leaning into their subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
And letting them know, hey, I appreciate the fact that you're giving me the time to share some of this expertise that I can create some really wicked content with.
For sure.
Run it by a buyer. You almost certainly, hopefully, one of your customers. Don't be scared to talk to your customers. You have an idea. What do you think about this? See what they say.
Yeah.
Right. You can run little surveys. There's all kinds of but start with the social post before you,
Social posts will tell you so much. And this is what a lot of folks do not spend a lot of energy. Social posts will tell you what people what people are interested in engaging in, right? I mean, do you want to learn about candidate experience or, some other, or hourly high volume hiring? It's if you have all sorts of different topics you want to talk about, use social to immediately see what people want to engage in. And then you make then you start going down the next level and then build more content kind of hierarchy for that particular intent and such.
I like to tell people, if you can't get people interested enough in this idea to read a free piece of content that we put right in front of them, how do you expect them to give you money for for the paid delivery of that idea, which is what your product is going to almost certainly an expression of in some way. So if they don't care enough to click on this post, or this, then they don't care. They're definitely not going to give you $40,000.
No.
And I want to say, I like what Julie said about talking to the salespeople and the people in the front line, because that really helps with buy-in too, because you really need that buy-in and that internal support. And these are the people that are going to be pushing it also to your clients. So I really like that point, Julie. You've got to have that buy-in when you're experimenting, as well as hey, let's talk about this. I want to try this. What do you think? And can you help me make this a success? So I think that's a really good tip.
And thank you. Value propositions too. And what are the pain points? The sales team and your subject matter experts, your business lines, they're a wealth of knowledge, and bribes work really well. I have not.
Well, let's leave it at that. Back to the ethics.
That's the answer for everything.
Or honestly, I call that liquor
You know my
diplomacy.
secret.
No regrets. No regrets.
All right. On that note, thank you all for coming to this. This has been really fun. I appreciate you spending the time. And we're going to get ready now for the next session, which is actually going to be about using whole brain thinking and bringing that into your marketing. And I think if you've never taken the HBDI, you know, actually everybody who comes to the session will actually get a free link like to take it. So otherwise, it's hard to get access to that. It's usually through a corporate program. So, but everybody who comes to the session gets to take it. So come on over, listen to Ashley. She's going to talk about how she uses whole brain thinking to do her content. And yeah, it's going to be fun. That. Get a little personality test while you're at it. So, all right. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I just